Hello, this is David Smith's autobiography, Chapter 8, The Real World. When I left school in 1971, aged 16, I started work in local government as a trainee civil engineer for Manchester City Engineers and Surveyors. The interviewer said that I also needed GCSEs in English as well, but they were so impressed with my grades I got the job anyway. They said I had to go to night school to get my English O-level, which I did for 3 consecutive years and failed it 3 times. By then I'd been promoted and progressed at work, so I never did tell them that I never got my O-level English. I really enjoyed working in Manchester Town Hall. It's an amazing building, triangular in shape, wonderful architecture. You can easily get lost in all the many corridors, split levels, cross corridors, triangular and spiral staircases. I worked for the first 6 months learning land surveying, producing very accurate plans. The surveyor's office was up in the attics. Plan file department was up in the rafters and the roof. The archives store was up in the rear tower. 2 of us were posted up in the rear tower for 3 months, recategorising very old obsolete records and glass plate photographs, negatives. These were 10 inches square. They'd been up there for over 100 years. They were recorded photographs of a main drainage new sewer project which could only be constructed through an ancient church graveyard. They had to exhume many graves, and the glass plate negatives clearly showed photographs of the bodies in their coffins with the lids removed. Many were in a perfect state of preservation, fully dressed in frilly bonnets. We were unsupervised up in this tower. We played at setting booby traps for each other and climbed right up to the top of the tower, then crawled out under a leaded trap onto a narrow ledge round the outside for views across the city centre. I worked 8 years for Manchester, and then I worked for Oldham Technical and Public Services till 1992. While I was still in full-time employment with Oldham, I started my own house renovation business called Thorpe Construction Limited, making cash offers to buy run-down, unmortgageable properties with structural problems, then rebuilding and modernising them to become the best house on the street. And for resale, as a rule of thumb, the finished value was based on the purchase price plus twice the amount spent on the renovation works. So the more money I spent on renovation work, the better quality the improvements and the more profit was made on the sale. I renovated and sold 40 houses up until 2002. Then I started buying run-down, larger, prestigious buildings with quality architecture features and converting them into high-quality luxury residential apartments, then getting buy-to-let mortgages on some, which released the capital to buy and renovate more. I had built a 37 property portfolio by 2007. I've not renovated any more since 2008, as the demands of a private landlord doing all the maintenance and repairs on my own portfolio is very demanding and a full-time job. Chapter 9. Motorcycles. The love affair begins. I mentioned earlier that I was attracted to anything with wheels. Maybe this could be because of my lopsided gait and difficult limp. Wheels were a great benefit to mobility. When I was 13, my schoolmate, he was called Baden Powell, discovered an old army motorbike buried in his backyard. It was his dad's from the Second World War military service. It was a Villiers Excelsior 2-stroke 98cc, so we tried to get it going. Most of the bodywork and fairing and fuel tank had rusted away, so we stripped it down, making it much lighter, and used a fairy liquid washing up bottle for the petrol tank. Cleaned it up, changed the oil, fitted a new spark plug, and we had a spark. Mixed some oil in the petrol, because it's a 2-stroke, and tried to bump start it. We pushed it up and down Oldham Edge. Sometimes it fired intermittently. Then we realised we had to let air enter the top of the squeezy bottle to stop a vacuum forming. So we pricked some pinholes in the top to let the air in. We took turns riding it, bump starting it. On my time, it fired up for the first time on a small downhill part, leading to the uphill track leading all the way up to the back of Oldham Edge, or up over the Higginshaw Gasworks. This was my first ever ride on a motorcycle, and I was thrilled. I had pedalled up this long, grueling hill many times, and now I just sat on a foam-covered piece of plywood as the seat, and made the same climb without any effort. I was hooked on motorbikes for life. It was a fantastic first bike, and we rode it off-road everywhere. I remember the first day I legally rode a motorbike on the road at Manchester Town Hall. My workmate Tony Rees and I had started work at the same time, and we were good friends. He had a Honda CB175 with L plates on it, and when he was going to France to see his fiancée for a week, he hired his bike to me for a week. I signed his hire contract, paid the insurance, and then in our lunch break, I had a ride down Princes Street in the centre of Manchester. It was very busy with 5 lanes of heavy traffic, and I wasn't fazed at all. I was weaving through the traffic and couldn't wait to get going. On the way home, I went to ride over the moors. I reached flat out at 85 miles an hour. The hooligan boy racer, king of the road, had arrived. I was so excited, I forgot to put petrol in it, and Tony had already put it on reserve, so I ran out of petrol in the middle of the moors and had to push it for miles over the tops, and then freewheeled all the way down Ripondon Road to a garage. I soon passed my motorbike test on a Honda CD175. I was fascinated with the way a motorcycle banked round corners. The newly built roundabout at the 3 Hours pub near Eaton Park had corners which were banked round like a racetrack, and I wanted to find out what was the greatest angle I could lean my bike would go to, and go faster and faster and faster until the tyres lost traction. I skidded off. It was further than I had thought. I didn't mind skidding off at all. When the tyres gave way, I just bounced along, got up and got back on. The only damage was a scratch to the silencer, but I had to know how far I could push it until traction gave way. In those days, I was a young, strong, agile, and felt invincible. I took it to the limit all the time. Then I crashed. My only corners were how much it cost. My only concerns were how much it cost me to fix my motorcycle. My body healed itself for free. I soon passed my bike test and bought a Honda CB504. This was much faster, and I went everywhere on full throttle, overtaking everything all the time. I was king of the road. I didn't care much for cars. They kept getting in my way, like pulling out of side streets, saying they didn't see me coming, or turning right whilst I was overtaking them. I remember overtaking a car accelerating from the lights when it suddenly forked off right down a small track, and I bounced off his driver door 3 times as I was being forced down the track with him. and fell off and skidded to a stop. I jumped up and picked up my bike. He got out and asked me if I was okay. He said he was sorry he didn't see me. He heard me accelerating. He thought it must have been his fault, but I thought it was mine for speeding. So we both apologised and went on our way. Then I sold the 504 and got a Honda CB 754 at 67 brake horsepower. It was the most powerful bike available. Now, I definitely had the need for speed. Flat out 125 miles an hour, but it didn't handle too well on corners. It was a bit too heavy. My first serious bike crash, coming from Milnrow, round the infamous Jubilee Bends. If you were a motorcyclist in Shaw, along the straight approaching the bottom of Buckstones Road, about 100 miles an hour, in the distance I saw a moped followed by a Mini coming towards me. Suddenly the moped turned right into Buckstones Road straight across my line, and the Mini seemed to be chasing him. In a split second the Mini was directly in front of me. The impact was inevitable. I locked both front and back brakes, trying to reduce my impact speed, probably to about 80 miles an hour. The only way I could avoid instant death was to avoid a head-on impact. I pushed down as hard as I could on the foot pegs and the handlebars and launched myself into the air in a forward somersault directly over the Mini, whilst the bike impacted itself in the passenger door, causing the Mini to bend like a banana from front to back. The roof was buckled up and the windows were all shattered. It knocked the Mini up the curb, spun it round against the ended up against the gable wall of a terraced house. Meanwhile, I was flying through the air in a forward somersault. My rotation caused some centrifugal force which had the tendency to straighten me out in a straight line, pulling my feet one way and my head the other way. So my full face helmet slipped upwards, totally obscuring my view. I knew I must be travelling at about 80 miles an hour flying through the air, and the lamp posts were steel-reinforced concrete. Everything was happening in slow motion. My life flashed before me. I was just hoping not to be cut in half by one of the lamp posts. It seemed like a long time in the air. I managed to pull my helmet down so I could see again, and I was still travelling straight along the road, having completed a full rotation. Somehow I landed on my feet and skidded along on my hands and knees and elbows on my front. My life was saved by dissipating the kinetic energy gradually over the length of the block of 10 terraced houses. It's the immense G-forces of an impact that are fatal. Bike's entire front wheel, mudguard, number plate, forks and disc brakes and calipers were all squashed completely flat against the engine block between the two down tubes. Obviously the bike was a write-off, so was the Mini. I've been lucky again. All my metatarsal bones in both my feet were broken. I don't know if I caught them on the handlebars when taking off, or if it was landing on my feet. And I had minor abrasions to elbow and knees. I've got some photographs of this motorbike with me on crutches with a plaster cast on, in my autobiography. After the crash, my dad was really worried for me. I agreed to limit the size of my next bike to 250cc's. The amazing thing is that all the countless crashes I have had, I've not sustained even one scratch on my helmet. The Honda range models were 2 cylinders up to 250cc, and the bigger 504 and 754 were 4 cylinders. But they just bought a new 500 twin, which I thought looked a lot like the 250 twin. I was well known in Robinson's motorcycle shop in Rochdale because I bought trials bikes from them, and I arranged for them to fix Honda 250 side panel badges on the new 500 twin before I bought one. So I was deceiving my dad anyway. Fastest crash I had was 124 miles an hour on the M62. It was a bright, sunny day. I was happily speeding along when on this 500 twin when I noticed a 3-litre Scimitar GTE in my rearview mirror, which had only my 500 CB500 only had a single down tube in the frame at the front, so from the headstock, and the bike was prone to flexing the frame, which caused a tank slapper. I give it full throttle, but the car was still right behind me, so I moved over, still going flat out to let it overtake me. Then I moved back into the fast lane, hoping to gain some speed from the slipstream. But then I experienced the worst tank slapper ever. Even though I was extremely fit and strong, I could not stop the handlebars from violently oscillating side to side. There was a force caused by the high-speed wind. I'll have to browse it. Right. Continue. Chapter 9 continues. I was just explaining about my fastest motorbike crash, 124 miles an hour on the M62. I had a tank slapper. I couldn't stop the handlebars from violently oscillating side to side. It was caused by the high-speed wind, causing eddies on alternative sides, which form a vacuum on either side alternately, which coincides with the fundamental frequency of vibration of the frame twisting. This force can build up with immense strength. I pushed forward on the handlebars as hard as I could, bracing my elbows against my knees with all my strength, and I was hanging on. I tried reducing the throttle. This put more weight on the front wheel, and the vibration just got worse, so I daren't slow down. The bars were going left to right about 5 oscillations per second and rapidly increasing in magnitude until the bars were clunking against the full steering stops from left lock to right lock. I could hear the front tyre screeching on the tarmac in little jumps 5 times a second as my handlebars were shaken from my hands. I jumped as hard as I could and leapt off in a backward somersault at 124 miles an hour in the middle of the fast lane. I did not see the Scimitar car again. When I landed, it was very hard tarmac. I was obviously tumbling over and over rapidly, like a small insect would feel inside a matchbox being shaken around quickly, hitting all 6 sides of the internal box. I didn't know which way was up or down, but I knew I was still going down the centre of the fast lane, and all I could think about was another speeding car coming up behind me. A few seconds later, I was on my front, sliding along, still doing over 100 miles an hour. I was watching my bike sliding away in a shower of sparks, getting further away from me. Metal slides a lot faster on tarmac than soft human tissue. The amount of braking force I could now feel was tremendous. I was quickly coming to a stop. All I could think of was getting out of the way of the fast lane before I got run over. The last few feet before I'd even stopped, I quickly did a roll to my right-hand side onto the central reservation, and I jumped up and turned around and was relieved to see that no car was coming behind me. I looked forward and my bike was still sliding away with lots of sparks on metal on tarmac until it came to a stop in the middle of the fast lane. All this happened whilst going under the bridges at Birch Services, and I was only 200 or 300 yards away, and it wasn't until I sat down on the Armcore barrier that I started to feel any pain. Then I couldn't stand up or walk. As the adrenaline wore off and the intense pain kicked in, I only had one boot on and my leathers had worn completely through. My belt buckle had caused a deep wound in my tummy. I think someone from the services must have called an ambulance, and I was admitted to Rochdale Royal Infirmary for 2 weeks with severe multiple lacerations, but not even one single broken bone. I had been lucky again. The week after I was discharged from hospital, I was sunning myself on the patio in the back garden, wearing just a pair of trimming trunks, and I went in the house to get a glass of water, and I caught my foot on the doorstep and broke my toe. Chapter 10. The love affair continues, but off-road. Most of my bike crashes were in my teenage years and usually involved collision with a car. My mum and dad were very, very worried about me. Every time they came to see me in A&E, I had another crash. They tried to talk me out of bikes, and I said no so many times. But eventually my dad put his foot down and said no more. So I managed to convince him that it was the cars on the road that was the danger. So if I got to get a ride a trials bike and compete off-road, it would be okay. So at 20 years of age in 1975, I joined Shoreham District Motorcycle Club and got myself an Autocycle Union competition licence. I started trials riding in 1975. Trials competitions take place off-road, but unlike motocross, it's not a race, it's a test of riding through challenging terrain or sections using pure skills and balance and control. If you lose balance and have to put a foot down to steady yourself, then you lose 1 point each time you put your foot down. If you stop or fall off, or fail to get through the section, you score the maximum of 5 penalty points. My control and skills were really progressing. There was a trials competition every Sunday with lots of time for practice and preparation through the week. I loved it. At the end of one event, I was putting my bike on the trailer and I saw an expert wheeling down the lane into the paddock through the gate between the vehicles and trailers parked. He rode round them and put his back wheel right up to his trailer. Then he neatly dropped the front wheel right into the slot on the trailer, all that on one wheel. Wow, I was gobsmacked. I thought, I want to do that. I had to learn to do wheelies. I rode my trials bike every day round the farm and the dirt tracks round Tandle Hills. For miles past Tandle Hills to Chadderton, Middleton, Rochdale, along the canal towpaths and over the moors for miles, occasionally crossing main roads. Moors were mainly unfenced in the 1970s. I taught myself to do wheelies, riding on one wheel. A bit like balancing a broom handle on your hand. It starts to tilt, you have to move your hand in that direction to correct it. With a bike, you start by leaning back, pulling up on the handlebars and give it some throttle. Our trials bike is the lightest, most agile of bikes to learn on. They are also pretty tough and can survive being thrown down the road when too much throttle is given. When you start at low speed, you can usually step off the when you start at low speed, you can usually step off the back and run alongside whilst keeping hold of the handlebars until the front wheel comes down. Sometimes you just have to launch it forward and sometimes you just fall off on your ass. But with persistent practice, once up at the point of balance, when the combined centre of gravity of the bike and rider is directly over the point of contact of the real tyre on the ground, then it's a matter of gentle throttle control, like moving a broom handle forward and aft. At low speed, the bike just keeled over to the left or the right, but with a little more speed, over 20 miles an hour, the gyroscopic forces of the rotating wheels will keep it from keeling over sideways. You can even try to turn the handlebars with the front wheel, won't turn, but it will bank the bike in the opposite direction so you can steer it around corners. The faster you go, the easier it is. Pulling a wheelie is easier when going up a hill slope, because if you apply too much throttle, then the slope slows you down faster, bringing the front wheel forward again. But sometimes the slope is not enough, so then you need to learn balancing the throttle to raise the front against gentle rear brake control to bring it down again. Once you've mastered throttle and brake control, you can control wheelies even going down hills and round corners. I progressed from trials riding to AMCA motocross, which is just a flat-out race from start to finish. Multiple laps around the course with hills and jumps and dust and sand and mud and bogs, anything for a challenge. As per trials, there's a race on every Sunday. I bought a 1974 Kawasaki KX 400, especially for wheelies. After doing a wheelie for a few miles, I suffered cramp in my arms, whilst the stress of leaning back and hanging on. So I made extra foot pegs at the rear of the seat, which worked well. I fabricated a link bar to the gear selector so I could change gear on the new foot pegs, and I fitted a 7-foot long cable from the rear brake hub lever to an additional clutch lever on the left side of the handlebars. So now I had full throttle and brake controlling in the standing position. I was doing regular display rides at monthly drag race meetings, at road race events, and I even did a charity fundraising school fair. A raffle was organised, and the winner, a young schoolgirl, won a pillion ride on my bike, whilst I wheeled it in a figure-8 pattern in the tennis courts, with all the spectators on the outside of the mesh. She even got a picture in the Oldham Chronicle. Health and safety didn't really exist in those days, and no company would insure me anyway. The Kawasaki was registered and taxed and insured for the road, and I regularly wheeled it all over the quiet moorland roads for miles. I got lots of strange looks from occasional passing cars and oncoming direction. The police weren't keen on this, so in busy places I just rode normally. I wheelied my trials bike for about a mile up Middleton Road, Royton, once. Not knowing the police car was following me, they pulled me over and charged me with the offence of riding in a position not being in full control of the motorcycle. The superbikes at the time didn't really have the power to pull wheelies, so wheeling wasn't an actual offence. I went to the court hearing and pleaded not guilty. My argument that I was riding my motorcycle with full control, as this was my field of expertise. But the judge still gave me endorsements, and I was banned for 6 months. I was also banned from driving my car, which I thought was very unfair. I didn't have any offences in cars, and it's a different driving test as well. So, hardly fair, I thought. Short and district motorcycle were always doing things to attempt to give bikers a better name, like fundraising events for charities. And at one club meeting, someone shouted, "I know what we can do to raise funds for charity. Dave Smith can beat the world wheelie record for the longest continuous wheelie." So that was it. The challenge was set, and I had to do it. In the summer of 1975, Baden and I went to Wembley Stadium in London, along with 100,000 other spectators, to watch the Evel Knievel motorcycle show jump over 13 London buses, and a full circus show as well. There was a high wire act from the football pitch at one end up to the roof of the stands on the other. The wire walkers performed various stunts, and someone pedalled a bicycle up and down on the wire, with no tyres on, so rims would sit on the cable. A 70-year-old yoga expert climbed up to the top of a wobbly 40-foot ladder up to a small platform fastened to the top, and a children's inflatable paddling pool was placed on the grass pitch underneath, and a hosepipe filled it with water, just 10 inches deep. Then the man carefully leaned forward and dove off, falling belly first, with a big arch, freefall skydiver does, arms and legs spread out wide, and he had to be totally relaxed and belly flopped, displacing nearly all the water outwards from the pool. He stood up unharmed, and about 1 inch of water was left in the pool. There was no tricks to that one, just skill. Evel Knievel was a real original daredevil and professional stunt showman. He took extreme risks. Sometimes he wins through his expertise, experience and jumping skills, but sometimes he crashes. I think half the crowd came to see a spectacular crash. He has suffered many broken bones in his career, and this time it didn't disappoint. So after all the circus arts had finished, he came out in a very noisy, race-tuned 1200cc Harley Davidson. He raced it around a bit up and down. He pulled some wheelies on plywood sheets up and down the pitch, either side of the 13 buses, while standing on the seat, which I thought was impressive. He rode it to the top of a takeoff ramp, looking over the roof of the buses like a warm-up test run. There was a 4-foot wide run started right at the top of the stands at one end of the stadium. Coming down like a steep hill, it came all the way down to about a 4-foot platform elevated above the football pitch, along at pitch level, then up a smooth curve to the roof of the first bus. There was a landing ramp at the other end of the buses, which came back down to ground pitch level just before the end of the football pitch, and there was an exit tunnel for him to decelerate him as he left the stadium. I thought this looked a bit dodgy, and that maybe Wembley Stadium wasn't quite long enough for such a jump. When he came to the final of the show, Evel rode the Harley to the very top of the stands, turned it around on a small platform, positioning it lined up for the jump. The crowd was silent in anticipation. You could have heard a pin drop. No one would have wanted to be in his shoes. The only sound was the gentle tick over from the Harley in the distance. Everyone waited in complete silence for what seemed like an eternity. Then, with a great roar from the engine, he set off, accelerating quickly through the gears, down the ramp, along the approach run, up the ramp, and then throttled off and came to an abrupt stop at the top of the takeoff ramp. It was a practice run to get the feel of the elevated plywood sheeting and to cultivate the curvature of the takeoff ramp. He did 2 or 3 practice runs. The last one at the top of the takeoff point, he waved to the crowd to say, "This is it." Then he went right to the starting point and did the full run-up takeoff ramp, reaching a fantastic speed, and flew straight and level over the roofs of the buses. The front wheel landed on the down ramp, but the back wheel landed just on the flat part over the roof of the last bus, and it bounced upwards. The front wheel continued straight down the ramp, the slope, but the back wheel was still in the air, and the seat had catapulted his backside into the air, and he was what we motocrossists call a flying W with legs apart. It's not good, and it's hard to recover from this position. At this point, he was thrown over the handlebars, and the bike's front wheel buttled sideways, and he bounced down the ramp with the bike cartwheeling behind him, and it clobbered him a few times. Paramedics were instantly put him on a stretcher and into an ambulance. Then everyone's amazement, just like the professional showman he is, he insisted on being carried to the top of the landing ramp to address the audience, in a 10-minute speech. I'd experienced quite a few high-speed crashes and broken bones myself by this time, and they do really hurt a lot. I can't help admiring Evel Knievel, a talented, experienced, fearless showman, and he did all that on an antiquated, overweight, underpowered Harley Davidson, which only has 3 inches of suspension. They brought the mould when he was made. He certainly influenced my stunt riding career. Shaw Bike Club ran an annual trip to the Isle of Man TT races, with about 40 or so of its members going every year. In 1978, a well-known stunt rider from Kent called Dave Taylor did a wheelie display around the TT circuit between the morning and afternoon races, whilst the road was still closed. One club member suggested that I should go out on the long straight approaching Ballacrane just before Dave Taylor was due to come past. I should pull a wheelie all the way down the straight to the Ballacrane pub, where then there was a live radio broadcast on Manx Radio. So I did it, and the course commentator mistook me for Dave Taylor until I arrived at the pub. Then I disappeared into the crowd to avoid the police. After TT week, although Dave Taylor didn't really continuously all the way around the full course, and from the Ramsey hairpin and over the places, he claimed to set a world record for the longest continuous motorcycle wheelie of 6.25 miles. So that's what I had to beat. That year I also ran a slow riding competition in the Isle of Man, which is just a balance thing. I had to balance with my feet up on a roughly marked out track. It was on rough ground with ruts, so I wedged the front wheel on full lock between 2 bits of rut and managed to balance stationary with my feet up for about 5 minutes, which won a slow riding competition. I also was dared to jump over some friends from Shaw Motorbike Club, so I obliged. Shaw Motorbike Club had an annual trip to the TT races. It was always a big event. On one of my early Isle of Man trips, the first time I had to go at bungee jumping, I had seen it on TV, but this was the first operational crane I'd seen for real. On the promenade in Douglas, we arrived off the ferry at about 6 a.m. in the morning and rode our bikes along the prom to check in at the Hotel Continental. There were some jumpers jumping head first from the basket over the wall, over the sea, getting their hair wet in the sea. I dropped my bags off at the hotel and went straight back to have a go. None of my mates wanted to go, so I went back alone. Booked myself on for my first jump. The other jumpers had all gone, so there was only me there. It looked higher now I was up close, and I really wanted to watch another jumper go first. But anyway, I got weighed so they could calculate the drop and the length of the bungee cord, harnessed me up and attached the bungee. I wanted to check all the carabiners because on one of my scuba diving trips in low visibility waters, I had a line fastened up with a spring-loaded carabiner and a twist against the line which opened the spring catch and became disconnected. That's the last thing I wanted to happen, accidentally disconnected. So I checked they were all locked with screw collars. All this faffing about was making me nervous, and by the time it was time to go up, the tide had gone out. I had to jump over the hard, wet sand. I was then told to get into the crane basket. The bungee went through a hole in the floor, and the other end was attached to my ankles in the basket. As the basket was raised, the bungee dangled in a loop below. I was looking down over the rooftops and chimneys, which seemed to be a heck of a way down. The instructor unlocked the gate and told me to step forward to the edge and hold the rails behind me and lean forwards. He then said he would blow his whistle 3 times and then I should go. The whistle immediately just went peep, peep, peep very quickly. And guess what? I wasn't ready. I was expecting time to think about it, and 3 big smooth blows to line myself up to let go. And there was no mates below to egg me on, and there was no one watching, and I could go down. He said, well, you can go down in the basket. I was all worked up, but I knew I had to do it, so I dove off head first. Phew-wee, that was a big relief. The anticipation was far worse than the jump. After that, all my future bungee jumpers were easy. I went to the TT course for about 10 years on road bikes, and then another 10 years in a van with 3 or 4 of us sharing on enduro bikes. In 1979, I went on my KX 400 wheelie bike. On the 1st of June, we arrived on the ferry about 3:30 a.m. and went to the Hotel Continental in Douglas. I dropped my bags off and decided to do a lap of the TT circuit while it was just coming daylight before there was any traffic or police about, pulling some wheelies on the way around. Another club member, Husky, came out with me. There was no traffic at all. We hadn't gone very far through Union Mills when I slowed down to pull a wheelie, and Husky came flying past me so close he hooked my handlebars with his left shoulder, forcing my bars to go full lock to the left, and I went flying, and I broke my right tibula. I was not at all pleased. Husky came back full of apologies and begged me not to tell the police. He suggested I said that I hit a brick on the road and that he would pay for my bike to be repaired. He then went. An ambulance arrived and took me to the hospital. My leg was straightened and I had yet another pot leg. On average, I had about 1 pot leg a year, and I was unable to walk without crutches, but it didn't stop me riding my motorbike. There was a club photograph taken at St John's on the TT course. I am the one on the far back, stood up at the back so you can't see my plastic cast. There are pictures in here as well. I just remembered an interesting TT trip in the early 90s. 3 of us took enduro bikes in a transit van. We did a lot of off-road riding, trails over the mountains on the inside of the circuit on race days. This gave us access to isolated points on the track where we were not accessible for the rest of the island. Halfway along Soulby Strait, the fastest point on the TT course, there's a small village with a Soulby pub and a post office and a row of small cottages facing straight onto the road. And one of these houses had opened a small tea room garden at the gable end of the garden, so that it was immediately against the circuit road. No footpath. We ordered tea and cakes and sat on the garden furniture. I turned my chair around next to the wall, hoping I could see the oncoming bikes approaching partway along the straight. The wall was about 2 feet high and it had 1 foot wide concrete flag on top. I had my teacup on the flag whilst leaning over to see the first bike come in. The race had started. We could hear screaming engines coming flat out at 180 miles an hour. There was a slight bend and the wall was right on the apex of the bend, so I could not see very far down the straight. I didn't see the bike because it was less than a foot away from the wall at 180 miles an hour. I just felt an enormous pressure wave hit me in the face, and then a vacuum which sucked all the tea out of my cup. My reflex action was to jump back. It was quite an adrenaline rush to be unexpectedly to be so close to something going so fast. On Sunday, 22nd of July 79, I competed in the hill climb event at Bating's Dam on my KX 400 and won the fastest time of the day. On Sunday the 19th of August 1979 was my first professional stunt ride performance at Steve Murty's drag race meeting at the New York Raceway, Melbourne. You can see the Dave Smith motorcycle stunt show at the end of the autobiography. For my attempt for the longest wheelie, I found a suitable venue at Aintree Road Race Circuit. Aintree is of course most famous for the Grand National Horse Race. The road track is inside the horse racing course. I arranged for a practice run week before. The clockwise track is almost 2 miles long with various corners. The first is a left-hand elbow, then some sweeping right-hand bends leading onto the fast long back straight, which then leads into a tight right-hand hairpin bend before the start-finish straight. I had got round the hairpin. This time I got round the hairpin on my front wheel and stopped turning. When I got to the hairpin, I had to slow down to about 10 miles an hour to get round. I couldn't steer it at that speed. I was going too slow. The gyroscopic forces were not enough to control the steering, so I keeled over and my attempt was over. Being an engineer, I knew about kinematics. Momentum is mass time velocity. In this case, the gyroscopic force is the momentum, and I had to reduce the velocity to get around the hairpin, so my solution was to increase the mass of the wheels. I melted lead flashing and poured it into cylindrical moulds. Heavy weights, drilled holes down the middle and attached them to the spokes on the front and back wheels. I fine balanced the wheels with lead soldering wire, and it worked amazingly, but I still had the problem that the front wheel would stop spinning after about a few miles and not being in contact with the ground. I had the idea of fixing plastic cups on the spokes to catch the wind, so as I was doing over 50 miles an hour on the back straight, they would spin the wheel, but it didn't generate enough torque. So I found a more aerodynamic shaped cups with pointed bases, so they'd be more streamlined, cut through the wind whilst at the top of the wheel, and then catch the wind at the bottom of the wheel. But even this wasn't strong enough. The only other thing I could think of, was to fit an electric motor on the front wheel. So I went to Booth Old Car Scrapyard and bought a 6-volt electric windscreen wiper motor. I mounted it on the front leg of my on a spring-loaded hinge next to the front wheel on the fork boot. The KX400 was an enduro bike originally with lights, and it had a magneto which generated a small alternating current, which wired I had to wire it to a rectifier to convert it to direct current for the wiper motor. The bike had a negative AC earth, so I had to isolate it by wrapping the front fork with rubber inner tube to insulate it. I fitted a toy wheel to the motor shaft and filed it down to the right diameter, so it drove on the side of the tyre wall like a dynamo in reverse, with a small toggle switch on the handlebars so I could switch it on and off when needed. And guess what? It worked. Now I could easily control and steer a wheelie up or downhill, fast or slow, going very slow speeds to get around the tight turns and go in any directions. On the day of my world wheelie record attempt at Aintree, I had to say I smashed it, completing 9 full laps on the back wheel. I wrote an article on my account of the day, which was published in the Biker magazine on a 2-page centre spread, and that's included as the next page, which is a lot of reading. So I'll not read all that. And then there's newspaper cuttings from all over the world. In 1979, I had completely given up road bikes. I borrowed one to take my Institute of Advanced Motoring test. It involved Saturday morning classroom lessons, supervised rides on the road, learning to predict potential hazards, and learning a lot of safety procedures to apply on my riding habits. Since I passed my advanced driving test, I had no more road crashes for the next 30 years. When I was in my 50s, I bought another road bike, a Yamaha DR800, or Dr. Big as they were known. This was similar to my old favourite, the Yamaha XT500 single, only it was 800cc four-stroke. The big thumper had lots of torque. It was built for the Paris-Dakar rally, with a massive fuel tank and long desert crossings. It was too big and heavy for me, So I modified it, took the big tank off and luggage rack off, the mud guards off, headlamp, screen, surround, exhaust, silencer, and that loses a lot of weight. Then I fitted a small peanut petrol tank, motocross mud guards, motocross handlebars, a megaphone silencer, and a small rear light off a trials bike, a small plastic headlight, and lowered the suspension in the front and rear, which improved the handling and agility. One of my all-round favourite bikes I owned was a Yamaha XT500, a single cylinder with lots of torque and a noisy megaphone silencer. It was okay for light off-road use, but a bit too heavy to be competitive on, but it was okay on the roads for commuting through traffic, rush hour traffic. I went to Manchester and back on it every day. It was noisy. Other road users could hear me coming, which is an extra safety feature. When I worked in Manchester Town Hall, I was quick enough to beat everything away from the traffic lights, and I could filter through standing traffic to get to the front of each red light. Sometimes it was a bit of a squeeze between wagons and buses and cars with wide handlebars, which were just the same height as car wing mirrors. So when I came to a narrow gap where a mirror was in the way, I would approach slowly, then with a touch of throttle, use of the clutch, I would pull a small wheelie precisely through the narrow gap, just enough to raise the handlebars to clear the mirrors. It was like poetry in motion. When I was in my late 40s, taking Josh and Connor to Circus Arts in Rochdale, they thought it would be fun to try and learn to juggle and snakeboard riding and unicycle riding and tightrope walking. I also joined in, particularly on the unicycle. I has a world record for riding a motorcycle on one wheel. Surprisingly, I found it really hard. I had to hold onto a wall and wobble along. With lots of perseverance, eventually I mastered. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, comes to mind. Connor picked it up straight away. I found it easier to ride a tall giraffe unicycle, 7 feet high. I could ride it up and down ramps, along elevated bench, and eventually rode round Hollingworth Lake for Red Nose Comedy Day, and then in the Rochdale Carnival. The circus class was on a Tuesday evening, and there was a trapeze class on Wednesday, which I joined with enthusiasm. Since my superstar days, I had always had good upper body strength, and I was a natural on the trapeze. Firstly, you start on a static trapeze, which is the one I've got in the farmhouse, fixed to an old oak beam over the stairs gallery, and it's good exercise, like having a workout. Then for more confident, there's the swinging trapeze. You need a lot of room for this, because the swing tends to be from high as horizontal with the beam, 180 degrees of arc, to horizontal again. So the G-force is 0 at the top, that's weightlessness, and it's 2G at the bottom of the swing. This one I've only done on occasions with a safety harness connected either side of me for the swing. And finally, the full one is the full flying trapeze with mid-air transfers for professional circus performers with safety nettings. Well, I never progressed to that. Chapter 11 will continue shortly.